I do not share your analysis that our society is gynocentric because I have some very particular standards that I would use to gauge whether our society was gynocentric that really have nothing to do with the ones that you would. See, to me, if I were trying to measure exactly how gynocentric our society would be, well, that word to me means different things than you because it's a branch of feminism that I'm actually deeply sympathetic to be honest with you. Gynocentric feminism, to me posits the thesis that, this is not favoritism towards women per se as much as it is the idea that our society has gotten it twisted, right? In that masculinity is prized, in a way and everything, and is held up as if it's of greater virtue than femininity. Now, I would argue that it's very difficult for you to say that this society isn't, even though you would probably disagree with me. Predictably, you would disagree with me. You would say, no, the society denigrates masculinity, but I would posit a completely different thesis. Men feel beat down and as if their masculinity is assaulted, but in reality, what has feminism ever posited except, that. Okay, look, I'm a guy. I came up through this system. I saw how it played out. I mean, I see it even in my own comment section. The attempts to shame me if I'm a virgin, and to shit, be a little shit to me, and to imply that in order to be a real man, I have to conform to all these standards of being socially dominant, aggressive, violent, and all this other stuff towards other men, and kicking the shit out of any forms of disrespect and being a violent brute is what some people associate with masculinity. Now, do all men associate that sort of thing with being a man? No, but they're all like, look, there is a form of masculinity that is seen as, if you don't live up to it, that you failed somehow in our society. They put that pressure on men all over the place, and it's really difficult for me to see how some of you don't see it or live in denial of the fact that this is a thing, because I've lived it. I've seen it play out. I mean, I even saw it play out when I was social younger, whenever I expressed any like real emotion, getting hit with questions of, are you high or something, among my friends and peers. It was like, I can't live, and have the full spectrum of emotion, because in order for that to come out, I have to be high on something, in their eyes. And just, you know but where am I going with this? I mean, there is this interpretation of masculinity that it expects us to be violent and aggressive and dominant and everything over other men, and to behave in a very violent fashion towards the rest of them. And despite the fact that I am losing patience for the asshole-ish behavior on the internet, I'm not generally a violent person. I just am violent towards this particular crowd of people that I just want gone. I'm not a big fan of violence overall, as a concept. It's not something I generally am big on and everything. But I've seen it play out. I've seen men who act like it's the man's job to be the violent one, and that if you're not that way, that you've somehow failed the masculinity test. You're somehow a lesser man. I mean, there's all this pressure on us to conform to all these expectations, and some of them are, you know, positive, and some of them are incredibly negative in our society. I mean, like, and that's kind of what feminists are talking about when they talk about toxic masculinity. They're saying, there's this, we're not talking like, okay, look, there's not one masculinity in the first place. There's multiple interpretations of what it means to be masculine, and some of them are toxic. I mean, does that mean masculinity in the aggregate is toxic? No, we're not saying all masculinity is toxic. Nobody ever meant that, but, there was a corner of the web that was absolutely committed to misunderstanding that one, as if the feminists were trying to argue that masculinity itself was toxic, which nobody was saying. We were saying, some people attach a lot of meanings to masculinity that can be toxic. Now, does everybody do it? No, but it's a thing. It exists. It has an existence out there in the real world, and to pretend otherwise is kind of to live in a form of denial at everything. So when I think about what gynocentric feminism, posits. It posits that our society has kind of gotten it wrong, in that it has this favoritism towards seeing the masculine traits as the better traits and everything, whereas the traits that kind of keep our society going and everything are not the masculine ones, because the masculine ones kind of push us towards annihilation and war, and a warlike culture. And it's hard for me to look at America and see what you see. I mean, you think it's gynocentric because the courts favor women, and I just don't agree with that analysis. I mean, that's one way to try to gauge it, but that's not how I would. Because to me, to be a gynocentric person, and engage in that kind of feminism means that you think femininity is more valuable than masculinity. Now, does our society sometimes, have courts that favor women? Yeah, sure, to take the children and everything. Now, and that it potentially is an issue, because not every woman is of sound, parenting and everything. Some of them are not good for the kids, if you get me. They're not all. Now, usually the woman is the one that is the better better at raising the kids, but that is not always the case. Some of them are addicted to drugs, and any number of other problems that a woman could have, and yet men have found that often the courts still favor them, and that's a really significant problem. I'm not saying it's not, but when I think about what that would mean, I would think that it would, treasuring femininity over masculinity, and realizing that it's actually the more valuable of the two, then that it begs, to ask the question, why does our society have such favoritism towards football players and how much they're paid as opposed to teachers? The teacher's role is coded. Now not every teacher is female, but this is a profession that is completely like dominated by women. As the role of teacher and everything, and that's very much so a thing. And it just, to me, that would be, if you were looking at like a genuinely gynocentric society, you would not be looking at a society where football players are paid more than teachers. They would be on relatively easy, like, that would be one thing that I would look at to look for a gynocentric society. What are teachers paid versus football players? What are teachers paid versus, members of the military establishment, and how much do army brats get compared to teachers? I mean, these are the type of questions that I would ask to begin gauging whether our society was gynocentric. And from what I can see, looking out there at our society, I mean, there is some favoritism towards women, like the courts and everything. But, in this hypothetical, very gynocentric society, I mean, teachers' salaries would be much, much higher. Football players wouldn't make quite as much. You would have a society that treasured education. You would not have this epidemic of entertainment, where entertainment is seen as, like way like rewarded and paid much, much better than education. And like all these factors that I look out there on the broader public, I don't see a gynocentric society. I see a society that sometimes favors women, but is not, anyways. So I know many people here on YouTube see it the other way, but I have my standards for evaluating that question, and you've got yours.